Unit 3, Lesson 6. In this lesson, you'll use a compass and straightedge to translate a figure off the coordinate plane, given a vector and a preimage. And we will also describe a translation off the coordinate plane. So the relevant vocabulary from Lesson 5 is translation and vector. So this video will cover the lesson on how to translate a figure off of the coordinate plane using a compass and straightedge. So when we have the grid, it is easy to translate or slide a figure because we are given a number of units and we have the grid in order to be able to count and move that number of units. So for example, we want to translate this figure down 2 to the left 3. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So there's R prime. And since the square, the image of the square, will be the same dimensions as the pre-image, I can either apply that translation to each point, or I know that distance is preserved. So the distance from R to U, R prime to U prime to T prime, and so forth are all the same, right? The same as the original. It then says to draw the vector that defines the translation. So we start at the pre-image point, and we draw an arrow or a ray to the image point, and we can do these for all 4 points. What do you notice about the lengths of all the vectors? Well, let's use our compass to verify. So let's take a look. I use my compass, and I notice that when I measure the distance between the tail and head of the vector, they're all the same. So what do we know about the lengths of all? They are congruent. They are the same. Oops. They are the same. They are equal or congruent. Equal in length. So, however, if we need to translate a figure like the one we see below, we don't have a grid to count, right? This is why we use a vector to indicate the direction and length of the translation or the slide. So given the square on the coordinate, not on the coordinate plane, apply the transformation or the translation using the vector provided to create the image. So our first step in doing this is we need to measure the vector. So I open my compass, the length of the vector. There we go. And I apply that length to the pre-image point and make an arc. So I transfer it to one of the pre-image points and I make an arc. And I'm going to repeat that process for each of my points. You can just do it once for now. Again, yours is not color-coded. So to keep track of your arcs, it may be easier for you to just do one point at a time. I'm going to do each one for now to show you in the lesson, and then in the next example, I'll do one each individually. That way you can see. But for me, the compass is very frustrating to use on the Smartboard tools, so I'm going to just apply that vector length to each point, which you would do after you do the first one anyway. So I've applied that vector length to R. I've transferred my compass back onto the vector, and I have my compass point on the tail of the vector. And I'm going to open my compass so that it extends from the tail to that pre-image point R. Right, and we want green for this one. So we've applied the length of the vector to make the first arc. We're now going to get the direction of the vector to make the second arc. So with my compass point at P, I'm going to slide it up to the head of the vector Q, and I make an arc. Again, we need 2 things to intersect to put a point. And so I have 2 arcs that intersect, and so I'm going to put a point R prime there. And I'm going to repeat the same steps for each point. So I put my compass point on the tail of the vector. I open my compass to the pre-image point, and then I slide my compass up to the head of the vector, and I make an arc. So that is where S prime will go. And I'll repeat the same steps for the other 2. So again, I go compass to the tail, open the compass. Hopefully we'll reach U. There we go. To the pre-image point U. I slide my compass to the head of the vector, and I make an arc. And where that first arc and the second one intersect, that will be my image point S prime, and we'll repeat the steps one last time for T. So I put my compass point on the tail of the vector where P is. Again, this vector we would name PQ, starting from the tail, heading towards where we're going. I'm going to slide that up to the head of the vector, and I'm going to make an arc so that it intersects the previous one. And again, we're going to put a point. So that's T prime. My last step will be to connect these. And it should, again, the compass moves my arcs on here, should be congruent to the original. So I'll show you that individual steps on the next example.